Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Nickham. I'm the Education Director for the DPC Education Center, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our monthly webinar today to learn more about a young man's life-changing experience with both heart and kidney disease. We'll learn how things changed in his life and also be able to learn from his experience and perspective as we go through the next hour. But first, let's start with a couple of housekeeping reminders. So your lines are all muted, and at the end of the program, if you'd like to ask any questions, just do #6. And then after you ask your question, if you can do *6 to mute yourself again. You're also welcome throughout the program to ask any questions through the chat box, and at the end of the program, we'll go through those. You'll also receive the link to the recording and the slides, and there will be a handout, and you'll receive those by email probably within the next week. And we encourage you at the end of this program to complete the feedback form. Your comments are always appreciated, and your suggestions for future programs are also very much appreciated. So today's presenter is Bill Coon. And I'm going to share some things about him. He's an author, a speaker, an advocate. And I wanted to share, without telling you any of his story, I wanted to share that he's had 2 heart transplants and a kidney transplant, and those all happened in the first 20 years of his life. He's also an author, a professional speaker, a patient advocate, and the founder of the Keep Swimming Foundation. And all of these things have mainly happened in the last 10 years of his life. So at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Bill to share his story, his insights, and his tips and suggestions for us. Thank you. Bill?
All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. And big thank you to everybody who is taking time out of their day to jump on this call. As you may have seen that last slide with that picture, I typically am on stage when I talk to support groups or nurses and doctors and all that. So this webinar format's a little new to me, but I think it's going to be a fun time. I think it's going to be a good time for us. Basically, my hope today is to kind of just have like a really open, casual conversation with pretty much everybody that's on here. I've been talking to the wonderful people who have been putting this webinar together, and they were telling me, who to expect to be on this call, and they mentioned there's going to be people from all across the experience of dealing with dialysis or waiting for the transplant, or maybe you've already received it. So throughout the course of today, I'm going to hopefully just touch on different elements of the entire journey, the journey I went through, and hopefully through that be able to connect with you guys on a certain level and inevitably answer questions. My hope within the next hour is to essentially spend the first 40 minutes or so just sharing with you guys what I want to share with you all, and then we're going to have a big slide at the very, very end that just says simply Q&A. And once Q&A happens, as it was mentioned, feel free to chime in, feel free to ask questions. I'm quite literally an open book, so I'll hopefully be able to answer anything you guys have in store for me or what you guys want to ask. So with that being said, I do realize that even though I have traveled the country, even though I have given well over, at this point, probably over 200 presentations across the country in various stages, I'm still, at the end of the day, not a household name. I get it. Don't worry. I'm not Tony Robbins. I understand that. But what that means is, in order for what I want to tell you guys today to make sense, I have to kind of just at least give you sort of the Reader's Digest version of my life, and so that you guys know where I'm coming from, and hopefully gain not only credibility but also your respect going forward as I talk about the patient experience and hopefully be able to connect with you guys a little bit more. So with that being said, as it was mentioned before, I've received 2 heart transplants and a kidney transplant. My first heart transplant occurred back when I was a baby, 21 days old in 1989. I was born, well, I actually was born having a heart attack. I was not breathing when I came into the world. And shortly after that, the doctors pulled my parents aside and explained to them that I had been born with a congenital heart defect. And for those of you who do not know what that is, it's essentially not genetic. It had nothing to do with my mother's fault. It was just an anomaly that happened while I was being, going through birth. And I was born with HLHS, hypoplastic left heart syndrome. So essentially what it meant was the left side of my heart didn't work, but it also meant that my parents had two choices. Choice one, they could take me home, allow Mother Nature to take her course, and in about 6 days, they would find me passed away silently in my crib. Their second option, of course, was to put all their faith, all their hope, all their trust, and their resources into a team of doctors and into a list called the organ transplant recipient list. And of course, my parents chose the latter. And in a matter of 12 hours, I was airlifted by helicopter and I was taken to a hospital in downtown Chicago. And it was in Chicago, Illinois, in this hospital where my parents were told that the only way I was going to live was if I would receive a heart transplant. But not only that, they were told that they were only going to give my parents 21 days to have me in their life unless the heart transplant became available. And sure enough, 21 days later, actually in the final days, in the final hours, a heart became available when a donor offer was available in Ontario, Canada. And that night, it happened to be May 16th, 1989, a Learjet embarked on a journey to Canada to save my life. And that night, I became the 4th infant heart transplant ever performed in the Midwest and the 8th ever in the nation. And that heart gave me a wonderful life. Everything was great, elementary school, fantastic, middle school, high school, everything was going fantastic. And then it was June 8th, 2009. I was 20 years old, and that night, around midnight, I looked down and I noticed that my ankles were swollen. They were 3 times their natural size. And I thought it was weird. I thought it was bizarre. They were hurting a little bit. And like I said, it was June 8th, so of course it was summertime. And I was during my sophomore year of college. So I was living at home at that time with my parents. And I went into my parents' room. They were asleep. I showed my mom. They see my ankles. My mom absolutely freaks out. And that night I was rushed to the hospital via the car. My parents drove me to the hospital. And that was where I underwent a series of EKGs, echocardiograms, chest x-rays, until finally the doctor came back in the room and he told my parents that I'm in heart failure. I was then put into an ambulance, rushed down the highway, taken to a hospital in downtown Chicago. And it was there in that hospital where I found out that not only was I in end-stage heart failure, I was also in end-stage renal failure. And the reason for all this was the heart was taken out by something called transplant vasculopathy, which essentially is a phenomenon in which the transplanted organ seemingly ages decades overnight. And in my case, to put that into perspective, by the time the surgeon who was doing the procedure had removed that infant heart and had later put a new second heart in, he told my parents in the waiting room that that second heart had looked like an 80-year-old that had been filled with cement. So he was, needless to say, he was shocked that I was breathing on my own when I was wheeled into the OR. And as far as the kidney goes, the reason the kidney was taken out was because it was sort of this perfect storm. Not only was there a lack of blood perfusion from my failing heart for several months prior when this heart failure was undiagnosed, and I was sort of ignoring some of the symptoms, which of course meant lack of blood going to the kidneys, to the lungs, to other organs in my body, which was not helpful in this situation. But more importantly, that was essentially 20 years of my life of ingesting the anti-rejection medications, which, as I'm sure many of you may know and be aware of, leaves behind toxicity, can increase the creatinine, damages the organs over time. And it was just, like I said, this perfect storm of lack of blood perfusion, failing heart, and all these medications over the years. And sure enough, my kidneys had burnt out as well. So there I was in this hospital, and I was essentially told, you only have, not much longer to live. You're not really going to leave this hospital unless you are given not only the second heart, but you also receive your first ever kidney transplant. So I did the only thing I could do, and it might be something that a lot of you are already doing, or you have done, or you will be doing, and it is the fact that I waited. I later spent 70 days in the intensive care unit of the Chicago hospital until finally, thanks to the generosity of a complete stranger and to a family who stepped outside of themselves during the darkest period of their lives, my life was saved. When on October 21st, 2009, I received my second heart transplant, and the kidney transplant ended up following 24 hours later. But this brings me to how I got here today on a webinar with everybody, how I ended up having this career, how I ended up having Keep Swimming Foundation, how everything just sort of shaped out to be the way it is today. And I couldn't be happier where my life is right now. But what ended up happening and how I ended up getting here was while I was in the hospital, I realized there were a lot of people that were probably like me. There were people who were dealing with these thoughts that they were going through. And when you're going through something scary, like end-stage organ failure or cancer or insert literally anything that is life-altering, you have these thoughts of mortality, these fears of accomplishing goals and will I have enough time to get to them. And I realized that day that I was very, very blessed to also have something that maybe not everyone had. And what that was a very large family and a very large support system. And I'm Greek, and I don't know if there's any Greeks on this call, but Greek people are typically part of a very, very large family. And sure enough, I have 14 cousins and 6 aunts and huge, huge family. And essentially, if I didn't want to be alone, I always had someone who was willing to come by and talk to me. Well, like I said, I realized that not everybody had that kind of a support system. So on that day, I wanted to just make what I was going through mean something. And if I were to survive, hopefully help people. So that day, I decided to write all my thoughts down into a journal. And I decided to put down every single thing that was going through my mind with the hope that if I were to one day survive, I could have this thing, this book, this piece that I could possibly help people with. And sure enough, I put a book out. It was called Swim. Don't buy it. I'm not trying to sell you on it. Literally, I'm not even going to tell you the full name of the book, but the book was called Swim. And I put it out there, and sure enough, a bunch of people who were sick started reading it. Some doctors started reading it, and more importantly, a lovely woman from Florida started reading it, and she happened to work for the American Heart Association. She invited me to come out and speak to her heart group. It was primarily individuals who had children recently that had been born with congenital heart defects, and I was asked to speak to the group of people. Not to brag, I absolutely crushed it, nailed the speech, made a couple of the mothers in the crowd cry. Those mothers came over and talked to me, and they asked me if I would come and do their support groups, to which I was very happy to do. I graduated college a few months later, took my graduation money coupled with the money that I made on my book sales, and I traveled the country going to all these support groups and meeting thousands of patients and their families, and it was truly a wonderful experience. I did 34 shows in a matter of 6 weeks, East Coast, West Coast, you name it. Wherever you are, I probably was there. It was an awesome, awesome time. And but the reason I tell you all of this is because those speeches that I gave, those initial lectures, those 34 shows in 6 weeks, those were very fundamental for me. They ended up being sort of this base where not only did I realize there was a need for Keep Swimming Foundation, which I'll get to down the road in this presentation, but it also made me realize that there's a lot of similarities in almost every single person's battle. And if you happen to be looking at the slides right now, some of you might have just called in and you're just listening to this like it's a podcast. But yeah, the slide up right now says physical and mental battles. And the reason I put these words up here is because I've come to learn through my experiences of meeting all these families. And even when I was lying in a hospital bed talking to people, talking to survivors, I came to learn that, these, of course, were the 2 main battles that everyone fought. However, I noticed that the average conversation that people had in these support groups, the average conversation people would talk about when they would visit you in the hospital was usually surrounding the first, physical. And yeah, you can sit here and you could talk about, oh, it sucks to be lethargic, and it sucks to be weak, and it sucks to be on dialysis, and when the dialysis goes through you, how cold you get, and the shivers, and all that stuff. And yeah, it's interesting to relate to people on that end. but I think a lot of people don't really talk about a ton of the mental battles that really come with it. And with that in mind, that is kind of what I wanted to focus on today. And of course, I'm going to jump away from mental here and there to touch on a couple extra points. But I think there's a lot to be said about winning the mental battle. And in my experience, I've come to learn that when you're fighting an illness, again, it doesn't matter if it's organ failure or if it's cancer or whatever, if you can stay mentally resilient, if you can stay positive, you can push your body to go longer. And in the case of waiting for an organ, that, of course, is crucial because any day could be your day. Any day could be the day that the phone rings. So the longer you can fight, the longer you can hang in there, the better. And with that in mind, I wanted to talk about some of these mental battles today and give you guys maybe some tips or just simply just open the door on discussion because I think it's healthy to talk about some of the things that you might be going through. And with that in mind, this next slide that I wanted to share with you guys is this one right here that talks about feeling older than you are. And I was told by the people who put this together that there was likely going to be a decent percentage of people listening to this call who were quote-unquote younger. I didn't really specifically ask them what that meant. It could be that you're in your 20s. It could be that you're in your 30s or even 40s. Truthfully, as long as you're like 50 and under, if you're dealing with organ failure or renal problems and issues, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It makes you feel ancient. It makes you feel incredibly old. And there's going to be things, before I continue today, that there's going to be some things I say today that some of you are going to be like, that doesn't relate to me at all. I don't get what he's talking about, and that's fine. It might not be the same for everyone, but there might be a bunch of you, too, where 10 minutes later you're like, oh, my God, is he reading my diary? So hopefully this part is connecting with some of you, but what I've, in my experience at least, I learned very, very early on that, again, I was 20. When I was going through this, the average person that I would encounter in the dialysis clinic or walking around the cardiac floor, because how my hospital functioned was the heart was put as the primary and the kidney issues were kind of secondary to the heart. That's just how the doctor and the medical staff worked. So I was on the cardiac telemetry floor throughout my entire stay. And when my entire life in those 70 days, if I wasn't on the telemetry floor, I was hanging out with dialysis patients. And it seemingly everywhere I went, I was always the youngest person by 30 to 50 years. And that made me feel incredibly old. And that was incredibly disparaging at many, many times. And not only that, but I would then go back to my room after the dialysis or after I took a couple laps that my nurses told me I should take around the nurse's desk just to get circulation going throughout my body on days that I was feeling strong enough. And I would go back and I would look in the mirror and, the nausea that you get from the organ failure, the kidney failure and the rising creatinine and all that, and just the puncture wounds you get, how your body, just has these holes all over it from the needles and the caps and the bruising that goes through you. Like, just looking at yourself in the mirror makes you feel incredibly old. And I remember sitting there thinking about how old I felt, and the more I thought about how old I felt, the more I felt like I wanted to almost give up in a way. Like almost as though that light at the end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the swim, was harder to get to. And I ended up having this conversation not long after I started feeling those thoughts and seeing myself in the mirror and looking like that with an individual who was my cousin, and his name is Nick. And one of my aunts must have suggested that he talk to me. I truly don't remember how this conversation came about, but Nick sat down with me one day and we started to talk. And he had a very, very poignant comment that ended up being very important to me throughout my battle that I wanted to share with you all. A little background on Nick before I get to it, and the reason why my aunts wanted him to talk to me was because in my big Greek family, 14 cousins, 6 aunts, I was only the second person to really go through something traumatic in their 20s. Nick was the first one, and he was about 6 years older than me, but when he was 20 years old in college, he ended up having some pretty advanced testicular cancer. And he fought with chemo and radiology. He had all that for several months. And I was much younger at the time when he was going through it. So I vaguely remember his battle, but I remember him being bald and watching him go through some of the stuff he went through and the nausea and throwing up from all that. And anyway, long story short, Nick sat down with me one day when I was going through all this, and he just looked at me and said, look, dude, you just have to cash in your summer. And it really, really was poignant to me at that time, because I was sitting there focusing on my body and focusing on all of these people that I was seeing on the cardiac floor who were 70, 80 years old, and I was seeing all these dialysis patients who were 60, 70, 80 years old and feeling old and feeling very withered. And then I would go online and I would go on Instagram and Facebook and I would see what my friends were doing. And they were in college and they were going to frat parties and they were just posting stupid videos of them driving around and screaming and just having a great time like people who are 20 years old should be doing. And I was feeling very left out. And that alone made me feel old. And I started realizing after he said that to me that a large part of my problem is I was so fixated on what my expectations were of what I should be doing in the moment, that I was spending so much of my time focusing on, hey, if you were healthy, what would you be doing on July 25th? Instead of sitting here getting dialysis, should you be at a ball game today with Chris and Kyle, and the other buddies of mine? And I realized how unhealthy that was. And and after talking to Nick, I started restructuring how I was thinking. And I realized what he was saying is you have to almost look at this period of your life as a down deposit, if you will. If you're a finance person and you're into money, you might like this analogy. But essentially, you are cashing in 3 to 4 months of your life to have a brighter future. And it sounds weird to say, and it's hard to really get at first. But if you really, really think about it, you end up getting to this point in your mentality where you start to understand that there's nothing you can do about right now. There's nothing you can do about the cards you were dealt, the circumstance that you are currently going through. But if you just accept the fact that you are going to focus on your care, focus on getting better, that inevitably this struggle that you're facing right now will only set you up for a much better future when the time comes that you get your transplants, that you get your next shot at life. And with that in mind, I then later realized that this mentality, when blended with something else that I started to kind of develop in my head, it really gave me the strength to fight through a lot of the really dark times in my life. And what this is it's something that I later coined will. And it's basically the will to live. And you may look at this as goals. And I developed this early on when I realized that I needed something to look forward to after I cashed in these 3 to 4 months. And for some of you guys, you might be looking at it as cashing in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, maybe even a year. I don't know. Everyone's case is completely different. But for me, it was at first 3 months. I had to cash in June, July, and August. And then inevitably it became September, October, and majority of November for the recovery portion of it. Well, I came to realize that I had to have something that was going to be the reward at the end of this down deposit, if you will, the reward after cashing in these months. And I created these things that were called my short-term will and my long-term will. And to give you an example of what these are, for me, the short-term will was something that had to happen the second I was done with this allotted time period that I had given myself. So for me, I was, like I said, June, July, August. It had to be something that was going to happen at the very end of August, early September. That was my first one. And for me, I'm a diehard sports fan. I'm from Chicago. So it was, I have to go catch a Bears game. I want to go to the Bears home opener. I have to go to a couple concerts that I found on Ticketmaster. I have to go to these White Sox games before the season ends. And I went online, and I kid you not, I literally went online and I purchased a bunch of Bears tickets and concert tickets, and I spent close to $1,000 on a credit card just buying up these frivolous things. But the reason I did it was I had to have it. I had to have this thing that was touchable, that was tangible, that was feasible, that I knew that I could get to at the end of this terrible 3 months that I was about to face and pretty much give up, like, cash in for the next, for the better portion of my life. And on top of that, I decided too that I had to give my life more of a purpose while I was going through this, and I had to do something that was going to allow me to feel my age and do something that was going to allow me to feel like I was at least being productive, and that this illness and what I was going through wasn't going to completely derail my life. And the other short-term will was I decided that I was going to at least take upwards of 9 credit hours of college courses. Now, I knew I couldn't physically go back to college, but I knew of a local community college that was doing online courses, and I can get some gen eds out of the way. Now, of course, you might be listening to this, and you might be in your 30s, 40s, well done with school age. Find your own college, Find whatever it is that you used to do, that you love to do, but you stopped doing because you got sick. And find that one thing and just go for it. And for me, like I said, it was college. And I hung in there, and I stuck with college despite my parents. My dad actually one day told me that he didn't think I should do it because he worried that I was just essentially going to waste the money. Well, to a degree, he was kind of right. I ended up not realizing how sick I was going to get, and I ended up stopped taking the classes midway through the courses. Fortunately, 2 of the 3 teachers allowed me to send all of the paperwork in, and they gave me one big essay because they had heard about what I was going through, and I was able to get some grades on those. I believe I got C's in the classes, but C's get degrees, so it was fine with me, and the grades transferred. But what I'm trying to get at is it doesn't matter if you inevitably fail these goals. The purpose of these is not necessarily to actually achieve them. I never made it to the Bears game. I never made it to the White Sox game that I purchased. I never made it to the concerts. I ended up selling all of them on the resale market like StubHub or something. But at the end of the day, that wasn't what was important. What was important was that I had this thing for when the dialysis got nauseating, or I got so down on myself for what I was going through, or when things got really depressing and just stressful. I had this thing that I could just click in my phone or click on the computer and pull it up and be like, there it is, September 14th, Bears game versus the Lions, or something like that. And I just had it. And as far as the long-term will goes, the long-term will is something that, probably self-explanatory, is much further out. This is something that doesn't really have a set date. It's something you can't necessarily purchase right now. It's more of something that you just have to absolutely fantasize about. For me, it was going back to school and going to at least one party with my friends like I used to. And it could be as innocent as that. I've met people, because like I said, with the foundation, I've met a lot of families, and I've met a lot of people who are going through things. And I always ask people, what's your long-term dream? What's your goal? And I've heard things as far as, one guy was a history buff, and he wanted to take his wife and go to the beaches of Pearl Harbor and walk around and really experience what it was like there. Like it could be something very, very exciting and adventurous like that. It doesn't have to be going back to college or something really super innocent. Whatever it is that you want to achieve, do not tell yourself it isn't possible, because I'm here to tell you it is very, very, very possible. Even if you want to make a bucket list and your bucket list becomes your long-term goal, just have it. Have something that you can push for and fantasize about, because when the needles start to burn, and they put the potassium in the line, and your veins burn from that, and they're putting the ice packs on it, and just life starts to get you down, and you become lethargic, and you start feeling weak, and you start feeling old. You can have these things in your head that you know are right around the corner. They're right there for you, and it gives you something beyond just your family and beyond your friends and beyond just this simple ideology of just living to fight for. And I think it's incredibly important to have. And like I said, you might cash in 3 months at first or 6 months at first, and maybe it doesn't go according to plan. Or maybe right at the very end of your 6 months, you get the phone call, you get the transplant, but you didn't factor in the 6 weeks or 2 months it's going to take your body to fully heal. Like, then you're cashing in just 2 more, but it's a much better 2 more than your 6. But what I'm getting at is just be willing to adjust. Don't beat yourself up if you don't achieve the short terms. Just constantly be recreating new short-term goals, constantly be giving yourself something that you can push for and fight for and have that vision that you can hold on to for when the time comes that you finally get your second chance at life, you get off the dialysis machines, and you get a chance to just live the life you've always wanted to live. But like I said, so much of what you're going through truly is mental. And if you really, really understand that and you hold on to that, I honestly believe that you can give yourself much more time to make it to transplant day. I really do. With that in mind, I'm going to skip over to this next slide here. This is something I think is really, really important that I want to share with you guys. It's a very, very quick slide. It's actually my shortest slide that I want to share with you all, to be honest with you. And I'm only saying this because I speak to a lot of nurses. I've met thousands upon thousands of nurses through what I do, and I've become friends with a lot of them. And I've learned that many nurses, they want to develop good relationships and close relationships with their patients. But there's also a lot of patients, especially, I don't know if there's any mothers on the call listening to this whose kids are sick, but like mothers have a tendency, from what I've come to learn, of kind of disrupting that relationship between the patient and the nurse at times, and because they're very protective and very overbearing at times. I just want to just really, really highlight the fact that if whatever you're going through, even if it's an outpatient thing and you're dealing with an outpatient dialysis department or clinic, or if you are listening to this from a hospital bed in Cleveland Clinic or Mayo or wherever you may be, like, treat your nurses with utmost respect. If they treat you kindly, give them back the exact same kindness, regardless of how horrible you feel. Because your nurses will single-handedly save you from sadness. Your nurses can potentially save your life by giving you a reason to smile, and they give you enough strength to want to fight for someone else so that you can inevitably have these medications that they're giving you take effect. Like, never underestimate what the nurses can do for you. Just be kind to them. Be so genuine with them. Be open with them, because I've come to learn that the average person who gets into that field, who wants to become a nurse, does it because they truly, genuinely care. It's not about the paycheck for 99.9% of them. It's genuinely for that reason. So if you have any doubts about your nurse or whatever the case may be, just give them a shot. They're not your enemy. Just please watch out for them, and they'll watch out for you. So treat them with respect, and I promise you that's one of my biggest tips is they will single-handedly make your experience so much better if you can develop a lasting relationship with them. Me personally, there are several nurses who kept me alive. Their names were Carrie, Ashley, Irene, Melissa, and all of these ladies, to this day, I'm still very, very close with. I really am. And including one named Lauren, who's on our board of directors for Keep Swimming Foundation, believe it or not. So, but again, I just wanted to point out that real quickly before I continued, because I always have to give a shout out to my nurses because I adore them. The next one is very, very important as well. Be your own advocate. Now, you may have heard this phrase. If not, essentially what it means is you need to always look out for yourself. You cannot take what your doctors say as face value. You may have a brilliant doctor. You may. But something I've come to learn is that if your gut is telling you something is wrong, it is probably wrong. Look into it. I always tell patients, you have to become smarter than your doctors, because you have to always keep in mind that what they are prescribing, they are not necessarily taking, or they've never taken themselves. So a good example of this, and I'm not trying to villainize all doctors by no means. There's many, many incredible doctors out there. I have one in my staff. His name's Dr. Gordon. The guy was a very large part of saving my life. But there are a lot of patients who run into situations where they don't feel comfortable with maybe what's being diagnosed, but they're too afraid to speak up. You have to do your research. You have to know. A great example, and I might be a little bit on the extreme end of this, but a great example of this was, the hospital that saved my life, it was not the hospital that I originally went to. The day that I was transported by ambulance down to that hospital, the day that my family and I were told that I was in end-stage heart and kidney failure, it was a different hospital. And I went there, and the doctors, they pretty much told me, in all sincerity, they never once told me that I needed a transplant. Their exact words were, you can be sustained with pills, and quote, we do a lot with medications these days. They put me on a wide array of medications. Most notably, off the top of my head, they put me on 3 pills, Lipitor, Lipitor, and isorsabide. And these 3 medications all had different purposes. Lipitor was a blood pressure pill, Lipitor was a cholesterol pill, and isorsabide was for chest pains. All 3 of these medications, they gave me different side effects. Those side effects were, Lipitor gave me horrible mood swings, Lipitor gave me horrible muscle aches, and isorsabide gave me impaired vision. And while I was taking these medications, I noticed that I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And there was just something in my gut telling me that there was something horribly wrong happening, that I was not receiving the correct medical advice. So I spoke to my mother, because again, I was 20 at the time. And my mother, of course, was on the same page as me. She didn't really like them either. And we started doing a bunch of research. And the more research I did, the more research I started to reveal that perhaps these medications were not what I needed. And actually, a transplant might be what is needed. And fast forward, I ended up at a different hospital where they inevitably saved my life. And one of the first things they did was they took me off of all 3 of these medications, telling me that I never needed them to begin with. So I tell you all this not to talk poorly about these medications. Some of you may be on these medications, and by all means, you might need them. Everybody's body is completely different. You might not even be getting the side effects that I mentioned. But what I'm getting at is even if you feel comfortable about your health care and what's going on, if there's a certain medication that is maybe making your already difficult situation more difficult, pause and bring it up to your doctor, do research, figure out alternatives, and just simply have an open discussion. And you'll come to find that the average doctor is, like I said, much like the nurses. That they're in this field because they care about you. They're in this field because they want to better the patient's health and better the patient's experience. Very few of them are only in it for the paycheck. So look through what's going on in your life and be willing to speak up, because no one is going to be able to speak up for you. Your spouse won't be able to. No one's going to be able to do it as well as you can, because you're the one living it. You're the one going through it. You're the one experiencing these feelings and sensations that are in your body. And these little tiny things are really maybe small to them, but by changing them and finding a tiny little tweak, it again will add to the mental battle and give you more fortitude to keep pushing and keep going. Because if you don't have that, like I said, impaired vision that is making you nauseous throughout the day when you look at a certain wall or look at a clock on the wall or whatever you're staring at, it will be something that is just this little cherry on top to your Tuesday that made your day so much better, that gave you a little bit more of a push to fight and keep getting through. So make sure you always speak up. Make sure you always talk. Going forward, because I looked at the clock now and I can't believe we're already 40 minutes into this guy, I want to talk about this, the recovery element. Whenever I speak, a big question I always get is around what does it feel like to recover from transplants, and not only that, but what does the transplant actually feel like? And I remember being in a hospital bed and literally trying to sleep at night, but I was too busy thinking about what it would feel like to have the sternum that I could feel in my chest crunch and be ripped open. And I remember lying there thinking about, staring at my groin and being like, wow, a kidney's going to fit in there? How's that going to work? What's that going to feel like? And I'm here to tell you guys, to hopefully ease all of your stress and frustrations, it's pretty much painless. Like literally, like by the time I got the transplant, there were about 10 to 12 different things that were far more painful than anything remotely related to the actual organs being put in my body and staying in my body. Like the heart transplant, for example, I remember I woke up and all I thought to myself was, wow, my chest tickles. Like that was it. There was like this bubbly, warm sensation that was sort of popping along my chest, my sternum. That was the only thing I really felt. As far as the kidney goes, again, it was the only pain I felt on the kidney end of it was in regards to the staples. Your surgeons might do it differently. Again, be your own advocate. Talk to your doctors and talk to your surgeons ahead of time to see how they're going to close you up. For me, I didn't have that discussion, and my surgeon just happened to choose staples. Obviously, again, everyone's body's different. There might not be another alternative, but you might as well ask, see what's up. Even if it is staples, truthfully, worst case scenario, you walk around pantsless for like 4 days in your house watching Netflix. It's really not that bad. That was like my biggest struggle while recovering, in all genuine sincerity. Or one of my two biggest struggles was dealing with the staples, because even sweatpants hurt because there was just happened to be 2 staples right on the waistline. But it was like, 10, 12, maybe 14 days later that they removed them, pulled them out, and boom, as soon as they were out, I went right back to life. I was perfectly fine. The only other thing that you might experience in terms of the kidney recovery goes was the fact that obviously in that groin area, there's a lot of important muscles related to, lifting your leg up. So I had some complications in my first 2 weeks, again, just adjusting to my new area, at least while my legs and muscles kind of healed and got back to homeostasis. I was needing someone to help me get into bed because I just couldn't lift my left leg over the mattress no matter how hard I tried. I would literally lie down and sometimes just try to pull myself upwards with my arms, but my arms were weak because I had the cracked chest, so that was a struggle. So like for about 2 weeks, my mom had to basically just help me lift my leg. That was it. Like in the scheme of things, guys, compared to what I was thinking it was going to be like, and I was always envisioning pain and struggle and all these problems, it was actually nothing in the scheme of things, and it was super, super painless. So if you are thinking that, hopefully that helps you get over that road bump in your mind. And just if there's one thing to not worry about, it's the recovery and any pain affiliated with that, because it's literally remarkably painless. The next topic I want to get into is a very, very serious one, one that I'm sure many of you guys have thought about. Obviously, the focus here today is kidneys, and with kidneys, it's not like heart. There's the option of a living donor as well, a chain donation, all that kind of stuff. For me, obviously, it was the deceased donor. And some of you, that might be your only option. Who knows? I don't know any of your individual situations, obviously. I wanted to bring this one up just because I wanted you to know that, like, you're not alone if you sit around worrying about this, or if you sit around feeling guilty about this. I don't really have an answer or any advice for this particular topic, because there really is no answer and there really is no advice. I can only really share with you what I went through. And again, this is sort of just for the sake of open discussion. When I was in the hospital for 70 days, I remember pretty much every single night I would go to bed around 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I had like a little ritual. I would start by putting a pillow to the left side of my bed, because the left side of my body started to get raw because it was rubbing up against that plastic guardrail that was on the side of this very loud bed that I was sleeping in every night. And then I would pull the food tray over to the side of my right side, and I would have it where I was like pretty much OCD, like the edge of the food tray had to perfectly be lined up and touching the edge of the right side rail. And then I would reach up and I would grab this cream telephone and I would pull it forward and I'd put it on top of the food tray. And I did that because I wanted to make sure that if the phone rang, I'd be the first to hear it, because for some reason I convinced myself that if the phone rang with a donor offer and I didn't pick up, that I wasn't going to get the organ. I wasn't going to get the heart. I wasn't going to get the kidney. Just so you guys know, I was just a little insane when it came to that. That's completely false. Ironically, I actually never heard the phone go off. I slept through it. And I found out because Dr. Gordon and my nurse, Ashley, knocked on my door very early in the morning and told me that they had found a donor. So what I'm getting at is shortly after I finished this telephone being placed on top of the food tray portion, I lied in bed and I would hit the button, I would turn the lights off, and the lights would go off. And I would lie there, and for the next 2 hours, I would pray, essentially, for a second chance at life. I would just beg to God, the universe, Allah, whatever you feel comfortable calling it, for a kidney, for a heart. And shortly after I got done praying and basically begging for this, I would then transition to the final stage of my ritual. And for the next hour or so, every single night, I would fall asleep feeling horrible and guilty that I had essentially just prayed for someone else to die. And that feeling, there's no way to get around it. I've received emails from people all around the country and all around the world, truthfully, like Australia, South Africa, you name it. I've met people who have received their organs and 10 years later are still thinking about it. I still think about it. And this October is 10 years for me. There's really no way to really overcome it. I think it's a personal thing for every single person. To put in perspective just how deeply it means to you, or at least to me, the day that I received the call, like I said, Gordon and Ashley told me. Shortly after they told me, I called my mom and told my mom. She started to cry, obviously. I then called my dad. My dad lost his mind. He turned around and started driving straight to Chicago as opposed to going to his office in the suburbs. And once I got done telling them, I hung up the phone. And I remember I just lied in bed for the next 20 minutes and I just sobbed because I realized that somebody possibly in that hospital was having the worst day of their life. And it was a family and they were sobbing and I literally couldn't get out of my mind. And when Christmas came a couple months later, that entire holiday season, I didn't want a single gift. I remember everyone was trying to buy me stuff and I didn't want a single thing because I already got what I wanted, a second chance at life. And I remember just every single night I would go to bed and I would have a dream where I would just picture this family just crying around a Christmas tree. That was literally in my head constantly. And I'll be honest, there hasn't been a single Christmas that has gone by where I haven't had that dream at least 2 or 3 times. So it stays with you. And I think it's human for it to stay with you. Obviously, you think less and less of it as the years go on, but it always is a part of you, and it's always going to be in your head. And there's really no way of getting around it. And I don't mean that to be depressing. I don't mean that to be, make you sad or anything. I just say it simply so that you just know that when the time comes, you're not weird for being like that. You're just human. And with that in mind, I want to just close with this before I get into something about my foundation. What you're going through is traumatizing. What you're going through sucks. And it doesn't matter if you've already received the transplant or if you just found out yesterday or if you've been waiting for 2 years. At the end of the day, do what you can when this is all over. Do something with your life to make what you went through mean something. And it doesn't have to be as grand scale of, what I've essentially, I guess, done with it, with the book and speaking and the foundation. Just use this opportunity to make amends with people in your life that maybe you went into this illness having feuds with. It could be a sibling. It could be family. It could be a friend, someone you haven't talked to in 2 years. Use this new perspective and use this opportunity to just completely hit the reset button on your life. Or even if it's as simple as just find the pieces of yourself that you didn't like before and leave them behind with the illness. And then when the time comes that you're healthy, rebuild from square one and start to use this opportunity to build someone who you want to be for this second chance. And then use this second chance, use this gift that someone has given you, living or dead, to make the world a better place, make your life a better place. And it sounds cliche, but even if it's as simple as just volunteering down the street once a month, like do something to make this life better than what your prior life was. And if you do that, I truly believe you'll be honoring your donor. I truly believe you'll be honoring the experience, and you'll be able to just feel good about yourself and know that everything you went through, this 3, 4, 6 months that you cashed in, the year or two that you cashed in, it meant something. And with that in mind, I want to share with you guys something that I've worked on for quite some time. We only have 9 minutes left. I'm okay with staying late. I don't know about the people who are hosting this. They might be like, oh no. But if you guys want to stay on late and talk to me, I don't really care. Well, I'll hang here and chat with you guys. But something I want to share with you guys is about Keep Swimming Foundation. And this is, I guess, in my perspective, what I've done to make this second chance at life mean something. And what it is we're a nonprofit organization that helps the families of critically ill individuals, regardless of condition, afford the expenses that it takes to see their loved one in the hospital. For me, when I was in the hospital, my family spent over $7,500 on the things that you guys are seeing right here: hotel rooms, bedside meals, parking, gasoline, public transportation. When it was all said and done, they had over $7,500 on a credit card that I felt guilty about, because for the next 18 to 24 months, I watched my parents struggle to pay it off and pay it all back. And these were just things that insurance would never touch, things that they were just basically forced to pay. And some of you guys might be relating to this, or you might know someone who could relate to this. So long story short, I ended up putting that book out. Everything happened. I traveled around the country, and I came to learn that the average family that I spoke to was in debt somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000 worth of credit card debt, depending on how long their length of stay was, and of course, depending on where they were. You know, hospitalizations in Chicago and New York are far more expensive than a hospitalization in, I don't know, rural Kentucky, you know? So, but nonetheless, people were still burdened by these expenses, and it made life 10 times more difficult, especially when you're factoring in the medical bills on top of all of this. So I started doing research for these families that I was meeting, and I came to learn that the average foundation that was out there that would help families with these expenses, yeah, they were out there, but they were so limited. Like they were hot foundations that were only going to help patients that were at blank hospital, or they'd give 2 or 3 hospitals. And then the rules were like you had to be 400 miles away from your home, or there were like certain check boxes that were about financial income and what you've made. And I thought that was always ridiculous, because it doesn't matter if you make, you know, $40,000 a year or if you make $75,000 a year. At the end of the day, nobody can possibly take on $10,000 out of nowhere. Like very, very few people in this day and age, when you factor in people who have student loans and all that, can handle a $10,000 bill. And I thought it was crazy that there were all these check boxes. So I wanted to do something about it. Fast forward many years later, this idea was in my head for a long time. I left corporate America, started speaking full-time, and I was able to put the foundation together. And I ended up launching this in late 2017 with my board of directors. And we started raising money all the way through October to December of 2017. In January of 2018, we launched the foundation, and our qualifications were very, very simple. The patient must be receiving care in an accredited hospital in the United States of America. The patient must be receiving inpatient medical treatment at an accredited hospital for a minimum of 21 consecutive days. And the need for the extended inpatient medical care cannot be a reason that goes against our qualified conditions. And I know many of you guys are probably not on our website right now. Feel free to go to it, keepswimmingfoundation.org. You can check it out underneath Families We Serve. But essentially what that's referring to is we want to help people who are in the hospital for a reason outside of their control. So we've received applications, for example, of people who have had botched plastic surgery calf implants that later went septic because of them. Like, sorry, you didn't have to get a calf implant. We'd much rather help someone who's going through renal failure or going through, a child with neuroblastoma, something like that. So what's cool about us is we pretty much open the door to essentially every medical circumstance, and there's a lot of medical circumstances that are not covered by these grants because these grants are only, for congenital heart kids only, and almost like 80% of them are only for pediatrics and not for adults. So if you feel like you're struggling and you want to put an application in, you can nominate your own family. You can get your social work to nominate you, nurses, whoever, family, friend, it doesn't matter. It's a 3-step process. Step 4 and 5 are essentially done through people outside of you. But basically, there's an online application. After that, we need your release of information, also known as a HIPAA authorization form, that will help us allow us to talk to your nurses and doctors and social workers so we can just verify certain things and get the storyline straight. And step 3 is we send you a big packet, and you're given a deadline, and we need your information in this packet. It's essentially just like sending us receipts, bank statements, credit card statements, whatever you can to prove your debt, and share your story with us, as well as letters of recommendation, if possible. So that's what we're all about. We do this on a quarterly basis. So right now, we are currently in Q3 of 2019. We just selected actually 5 families that we gave $8,700 to. You can check out their stories on keepsweetfoundation.org. This next period of grants will be for families who are hospitalized for at least 21 consecutive days between July 1st, 2019 and September 30th, 2019. So if you feel like that fits you or fits a family friend or fits a patient, because supposedly there's a couple nurses on this call, shout out to the nurses, what up? Please, by all means, share that with them, and hopefully we can help some people out. So without further ado, it looks like I left you guys 3 minutes for Q&A. If you want 10 or 20, I don't care. I'll stick around. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Bill. This is Kathy. I really appreciate all the information you shared, the tips you gave, and learning more about your organization. I don't see anything in the chat box, but does anyone have a call directly for Bill? You can unmute your phone by pound 6.
I'll literally answer anything. I'm a tourist, in case you guys want to know. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, well.
Hi, Kathy.
Oh, Doris. Thank you, Bill. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Of course. My pleasure, Connie. My pleasure. Thank you guys for attending. Much appreciated.
Nancy, did I hear you on the call?
Yeah, you did. I just really wanted to thank you and Bill for this call. Every now and then it really helps to hear somebody else's story, and it makes you think of the person that doesn't have any shoes, but what about the person that doesn't have any feet? So it just shows you that somebody's story is always worse than your own. And what he said was really a lot of food for thought. And I really wish every person that had a chronic disease could have been on this call. And I just wanted to thank you both very much for taking the time out to talk to us today. Thank you again.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks, Nancy. Let's what we can do about getting that information out there. And luckily, we will have this program recorded, and we will reach out to a lot of different organizations and facilities to make them aware of this program so that people can watch it online in the future. I completely agree with Nancy, who is the president of our DPC Education Center, and thank you, Nancy, for being here with us today. But I do think, Bill, that you gave people a lot to think about, and your honesty was very helpful and enlightening as opposed to just glossing over things or giving a pat answer. So thank you again for being with us today.
Of course,
and if we get additional questions that come to us online, I will be very happy to share those with you, and then we can get back and share them with other people, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine for sure. We'll think of a creative way if people have questions, and I'll happily answer them some way, somehow. Not a problem.
Okay, great. I do see somebody. Yes?
Hello, yes. My name is Angie, and I am a dialysis technician. And thank you so much for teaching me so much about my dialysis patients.
Oh, of course. My pleasure.
It was amazing because, I don't know their stories, and a lot of them keep close to the vest. A lot of them are talkative. A lot of them aren't happy to be there, but it gives me insight to them. And thank you very much for taking out the time of your day and your life to share.
Of course, the least I could do. I'm glad you were able to connect with it. That's awesome. That's really cool. Wait, is this a question here? Bill, how can we get you to come talk to our patients in Jacksonville, Florida? Shoot me a message. I currently have so I travel around the country all the time, Doris. Sadly, at the moment, I have no plans to be anywhere near Jacksonville, Florida. However, I do have a bucket list, and my bucket list is to see every, as you picked up, I'm a sports fan, my bucket list is to see every NFL stadium, ideally with the Bears playing in it, and as well as every MLB ballpark. And long story short, I happen to know the Bears are playing in Jacksonville next season, not this season, but otherwise, just shoot me a message if you want if you want to go to my website, just shoot me a note, billcoonspeaks.com, BILLCOONSPEAKS.com, or you can, message me on Facebook, and somehow, some way, we'll get in touch, and yeah, we can chit-chat then and try to figure it out. Because what I do try to do with that kind of stuff is, if people genuinely want me to come speak to their support groups, I'll try my best. It's like by no means guaranteed, because my life is literally insane with how much I got going on. But if I'm ever in the area, I always do try to pencil it in and try to swing by. But I know support groups meet at various times. So, but yeah, Doris, shoot me a message, and we'll hopefully make it work.
Thank you, Bill. I think we are both out of time, and I don't see any other questions coming in. So thank you again for sharing the past hour with us and for working with us over the last few months to make this program a reality.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was cool you guys reached out. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. Please fill out the feedback form. That's most helpful to all of us. And hopefully we will see you next month. Next month, our program will be a little bit different. It is going to be in Spanish, and it will be looking at the renal diet. So hopefully we'll see you then. Thank you again, and Bill, thanks again. And until next month, have safe journeys, all of you.